All right, guys, thank you so much for your patience. We are live on Grow World. Shout out to Nick Marin. Appreciate you guiding us through this process, brother. Guys, we're here. We're in Spain. The CoNNect community is out here in Spain, collaborating with the Organic Cup, the Terps Tower Invitational. Shout out to Terps Army for hosting us tonight. So round of applause for Terps Army, please. Thank you guys for having us. So this is going to be a little bit unconventional type of CoNNect panel discussion. Typically, we have a lot of moderators, or I'm sorry, one moderator with a bunch of different panelists. We've got a room full of killers in here. So we just want to pass the mic. We're going to have an organic discussion. This is a sesh. Enjoy yourselves, get some food, get some drinks, twist them up, pass it around. We just want to start exploring, right? And I think one of the biggest topics about Spannabis this year is exploration for the future. What are some of the things that we've learned? What have we innovated on? We got some breeders, got some cultivators, got some TC experts in here, molecular biologists. Guys, this is it. We're global now. So the purpose of the CoNNect community is to educate. We want to level up. This is the community where we want to be able to share knowledge, give each other what we have to offer. And, you know, shout out to James Loud, just dropped his cannabis breeding book. So James, congratulations, brother. Super stoked for you to be here. James signing books live too, so be sure to pick up a copy. Also want to give shout out to James and Ryan for winning Podcast of the Year at the awards the other night. So congratulations, guys. Oh, yeah. So
yes, it was, Ryan. It was awesome. That's my producer right there.
Shout out to Ryan, the producer.
That's the guy that makes the show happen. He's behind the scenes. Most people don't get to hear him talk. At Christmas, we get to hear you talk. But this guy crushes.
That's right.
Makes me look good. Makes me look way better than I really am. So, it's a team effort.
It is a team effort, guys, and that's what we're doing. We're building a stronger team. We're stronger together. This cheesy tagline on this banner, that's what we believe in. Let's grow together here. So ultimately, I want to say shout out to Michael Fang. Michael, thank you so much for coordinating this all with us, brother. Thank you. And Peter, I know you couldn't be here with us tonight, but sending you healthy energy and vibes, man. Much love. So James, let's start off with the topic number one. What are some things that we've learned in the past about genetics and breeding and where we're heading in the future? What would you like to start with?
Well, so I just want to say we're in a really interesting place with genetics. I see it coming from a level of awareness. There's a lot more awareness. You know, I got my breeding book out, but there's a lot of awareness about genetics. There's a lot of genetic depression that's going on, especially in the Bay Area. It happened in Europe with haze, but I feel like we're in a really interesting place. People are curious. People are interested in making genetics. I think we need a lot more diversity brought into the plant. I think that's the next thing on the horizon is diversity. So in California, we have a lot of gelato-style genetics that are popular right now. But now it's loud.
There we go. There you go, right at the chin.
Right.
Mic to chin.
So in California, I'm seeing a lot of gelato-style genetics. We all are. Different variations of gelato, and there's a lot of genetic depression that's going on. I would like to see more diversity. I'm breeding for more diverse terps. But again, it's a group effort.
Well, you talk about diversity in terpenes. Is the market ready for diverse terpenes? Because right now it feels like California is in a compression circle and it's very insular. So when you step out of these boundaries, there's different terps and unique terps that are more accepted.
Well, so I feel like we have to do it. There, you know, and the plant and what people like is so subjective. So you have to trick people into liking things. You know, a lot of people think they don't like Blue Dream, but it's probably because they've never had good Blue Dream.
That's a good point. Is the cut the real cut? And I'm actually going to tap into Mr. Oscar from MyFloraDNA because I would love for you to actually talk a little about the DNA fingerprinting and how we've been using it in real world applications. Oscar Illan with MyFlora. Mike's to you, my man.
Thank you, Sergio. Well, I'm no scientist, but I can really talk to you about the real application of our fingerprinting technology, which is a way to validate the strain, exactly what Sergio just talked about it, that is to know exactly what that the strain that you're smoking or having is the real strain. So basically, we base our technology on 3,000 molecular markers to make sure that the strain that you're smoking is actually the real, ranch or apple bananas or whatever. Okay, so that's the real meaning. And this is a way, hopefully in the future, to establish a standard in the industry, to homogenize a way to validate the different cultivars or strains in the industry, okay? This technology can also be used for inventory organization and checking, as well as getting your own phylogenetic tree in your library, okay? So this is what we do at MyFloraDNA, and it's some science for the such a great industry as the cannabis industry, right? Okay, there you go. You have some information there.
If I can show this real quick. So James has a great section in the cannabis breeding book that actually goes into depth around DNA fingerprinting and the validation of genetics. So as we start to enter new markets and there's a lot more collaboration happening, we're gonna have a chain of custody. We want to make sure that we're actually passing around the real deal. And that's one of the biggest things that we're talking about with tissue culture. So talking about intake process, output process, building the chain of custody and the trust. I'd like to talk about this with Justin Gibbons, founder of Starts, Apical Biotek. Justin.
Yeah, how's it going? I mean, nurseries, labs, everywhere around the world, cuts get mixed up, employees mess things up. So part of the process of initiating something is to fingerprint right away when it comes to lab. So you can show somebody, hey, this is the cut you gave me before we did anything with it. And then going out the door, bringing it back out, you fingerprint it again and just confirm the same thing, show people. And then selling clones, right? Like, hey, this is the cut. There's also an argument of, what cut is the cut, right? What cut's the cut? So what do you think?
Well, so I can use wedding cake for an example, because wedding cake was sold in seed form. So there's a bunch of diversity in that genetic and that cross. And there's 30 different wedding cakes out there. And which wedding cake is the real wedding cake? That's up to, there's a lot of interpretation in what wedding cake really is and which cut really is the real cut. But using MyFloraDNA and tools like that, we can actually now take a deeper dive into it. We have a thumbprint. We can go, okay, that is my cut, or that is not my cut.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it.
And working with breeders, right, James? Also, if people try to cut fish, right, say they're selling your cut, like when you phenohunt it, you can fingerprint it and verify that people don't have your cut. Or force them to prove it, right, that they have your cut, because they won't. And then kind of get around the black market of selling cuts online that aren't the right cuts.
And if you don't know what cut fishing is where it's like catfishing with clones or genetics. But cut fishing is a term. It's in my book. It's a real term now. It's a real thing. It's legit, and it's been going on forever. But people give you a cut saying it's this or saying it's that, and sometimes it's not. So for whatever reason.
Appreciate that, Justin. Yeah. And that brings a hot topic, right? Trust and partners, and bringing up a lot of opportunities to work with people around the world. But how do you set these professional expectations, right? We're in a very cool industry, and there's a lot of handshake deals. At the same time, we want to follow through on our commitments and hold people accountable for what we're doing. That's a big part around the fingerprinting. And Oscar, thank you for introducing that technology to us as you guys developed it over the past few years. And I know I challenged you guys pretty hard around, hey, this isn't just building a big trait library so you can go around and do something like the past. What happened before us, that was a big thing. So the way we kind of went about that was very transparent. And, I think getting access to this community was a big part of that. Molecular biology did not have a good standing relationship with the cannabis industry. So we challenged hard and respectfully, but at the same time, we got a tool. We now have a tool that we can utilize for collaboration, trust, transparency, and validation. So, that's one of those big parts around stuff. James, you just talked about cut fishing. You actually put that term into the glossary, right? Like we got to start to create the industry and professionalize it just a little bit more. That's really what I'm looking at here, is using something that has a standard, right? And we start to put things into perspective as we start to develop these SOPs and innovate. So again, a fingerprinting tool, that's badass. Thank you. Because I think now we're setting new standards for me as a nursery. I can intake material. Does it actually genetically match what is actually said that's coming in? And something that I thought that was pretty cool was that you can actually test dried flower against the vegetative material or that DNA fingerprint with dried flower. So I'm sure there's a couple of examples that have got popularity or attention in the in the past where that could have been a very useful application of here's the genetic material that was inputted in vegetative form. And if somebody is trying to step out of bounds on the relationship or the agreement that's supposed to happen with those genetics, well, you can now test that flower against the vegetative material that was DNA fingerprinting. So just one use case for me as a nursery, right? I want to make sure that I am actually distributing and providing the truth and transparency to that breeder so that royalties are paid, right? I think that's a big piece. People are skipping out on royalties historically. We don't want that shit. We want to be able to be standing united and building trust because there's so many great genetics that are being pheno-hunted. There's so many clones that have never gotten released, right?
100%, 100%. And at the end of the day, it's about transparency and honesty, and it keeps people honest.
So that was a great intro topic. Where does that take us now? Where do we want to go in the future now that we've got some tools for innovation, so on and so forth?
Let's talk about strands. Strands and strains. And terminology. So it's funny because I think there's a lot of people that criticize people for using the word strain. Right? Strain is like a no-no if you're not in cannabis. But that's how language has evolved. The word cutfish. That's that people talk about stuff enough, it becomes language. So strains, you gotta I give people slack now. Before I was like, oh, you said strains and it should be cultivar or variety. And what is the right term? Is it a variety or is it a cultivar? And a lot of the stuff is backwards in cannabis. People say the word strand. What are you guys' thoughts?
I've learned to bite my tongue quite a bit over the past couple of years. But you're right. It's setting standards. It's just talking about how do we professionalize this to a manner where it's easy to digest. Ultimately, we're trying to educate the consumers. We all know that terps matter. We don't give a fuck about the THC percentage. That's not what we are here for. We care about taste and effect. So as the consumer starts to get educated, the more that we streamline this process and actually everybody catches on to the narrative of what proper terminology is and what that actually relates to in an overall experience and how we can introduce new flavors. That way we're not just trapped in the candy wave. I've nothing against candies. I wish we had more diversity of what we can actually produce at scale. That's just the reality of it right now. If you don't have candies, you're not in the game. It's that simple. So it's a good point, James. Yes.
Do you think this will lead to copywriting of genetics? This is a live stream question.
This is a great question from the live stream. The question was, will this lead to copywriting of genetics and IP?
Dude, there's a whole section of my book about intellectual property written by Dale Hunt, who is an IP lawyer. And if you look in ag, at traditional ag, there is plant patents, there is protection, there is licensing that goes on, and that's how it should be. I think if you do the work, people don't understand what it takes to create a cultivar. If you're actually intentionally breeding and you're going through and you're using your lights and you're using your labor, it can cost upwards of $50,000 to create one new cultivar.
James, I want that new cultivar that you're going to create for me in 2 months.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. It's a year process. To do it right, it's a year process. There's other ways to do it, but to do it right is probably a year's process to get something out the door.
And let's talk about that. Doing a breeding project right.
Right.
Testing, commercial validation, stabilization. Takes time.
Yeah, and also regrowing things. I think a lot of people don't understand. Like, I don't grow from seed for pheno-hunting. We actually use the first clonal generation, and with that clonal generation, we get a better look into what the plant's going to be like in the future when we sell clones of it or when we breed with it. There's a lot of things, and there's nothing wrong with growing from seed, but I feel like it doesn't get you the true representation of the plant. It's the second, third, and fourth clonal generation where it stabilizes.
So pheno-hunting from a cutting of a seed, great practice. So, and it's a great point. And I also want to talk about the different expressions that you get, right? We're going to get a different expression in cocoa, hydroponic, rock wool versus organics.
Yeah, everything. Oh, we got Brandon Rust coming in.
Mr. Brandon, come on in, guys. Hey, welcome. Come on in. We're just chilling. We're chopping it up.
We need you to chime
Get
in,
comfortable,
dude.
man.
You guys need to put me on the spot like that?
Jump in, coach.
All right.
Yeah, let's do this.
We're talking about substrates and the different expressions that you get from using different substrates.
Oh, okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Absolutely.
Okay, so different substrates. Usually when we're talking about modified growing mixes, the substrates are either going to be cocoa based or they're going to be peat moss, right? And the difference between those are typically the pH and then also the way that they're processed. So typically cocoa comes from coastal regions and they oftentimes contain high levels of sodium. And so oftentimes what has to happen with cocoa is it has to be processed. And so you'll oftentimes hear about people washing and buffering their cocoa. And the reason why they do that is they want to push all of those sodium ions out of that media. And typically that's done using something like gypsum and magnesium sulfate.
And why is there so much sodium in the cocoa?
Typically, the reason why there's so much sodium in the cocoa is because they're growing in coastal regions where you're getting a lot of precipitation just from the atmosphere even. So you have to make sure that if you are using cocoa as a substrate, that you need to have something that has been washed and buffered and blended, because otherwise you're going to be facing things like sodium toxicity. And what happens is that sodium will antagonize things like calcium, magnesium, and calcium.
Okay, so the phenomenon of the ferning. I'm sure you've seen what's going on with all the rock wool and the expressions of these plants that are throwing off fern-like expression. Could this happen in cocoa, or is it related to something completely outside of that?
Okay, so if you guys are familiar with Nelson Lindsay, Poetry of Plants, he did a little thing with what was happening with some of these medias, rock wool specifically, and what they were finding, and there was high levels of aluminum, which were causing aluminum toxicity. And so not only, I mean, I don't like to use rock wool personally. I'm an organic guy, so I usually use a substrate that is, organic based.
Sure.
And you can have that. It's a problem with the manufacturer, So you have to be careful. You have to be really careful with what you're using, because knowing what you're using as an input, not only that, but water too.
So that's one of my curiosities. How do you test for quality when you're buying a bag of cocoa or a substrate?
Well, me personally, I like to use Logan Labs. They have a really good lab, and you can test for a standard soil, saturated paste. You can do leaf tissue analysis, and you can do compost analysis. What that'll allow you to do is to understand what is happening in that soil substrate. And if something is wrong, you can identify that. If you were to look at a lot of the different crops, the commercial agricultural crops that are being cultivated across multiple different industries, whether it's corn or soy or tomatoes, cucumbers, it doesn't matter what it is. Typically what's happening is there's an agronomist. He's looking at the soil and determining what needs to be there to supply that crop for the proper nutrition for that crop.
You're measuring throughout the run, right?
Yeah. Well, typically what's happening, it depends on the EC of the soil, or the ability for soil to hold nutrients. If it doesn't have a good ability to hold nutrients, you have to fertigate more often in lower amounts. But in good agricultural soils, what you can do is add all of the nutrients prior to reach a certain level in that soil for that particular crop. And then you can essentially do minimal fertigation events where you can do some, microbial inoculations and introductions of things like, calcium and stuff to just help with your quality and your overall yield.
You had a great post on organic steering and initial inoculations. I really found that intriguing and fascinating, because as a hydroponic grower, I grow sterile, right? I have a deep water culture facility. We grow very sterile. So the concept of actual inoculation for that beneficial steer initially, it's fascinating.
Yeah. So biological crop steering, that's kind of a thing that I termed, and it's based off of looking at science. So I have a saying that the science doesn't really matter if there's no practical application for that science. And so what we have to do is look at what works. And when we're looking at microbiology, the reason why microbiology works so well is because they are creating these chemical substances, just like cannabis does, right? They're creating these cannabinoids, they're creating these terpenes. And just like cannabis, different types of bacteria and microbes produce different types of metabolites. And these biochemicals, they do different things to the soil. You know, you have things like siderophores, right? Which are able to grab onto iron and keep it in available form. You have different things that can solubilize phosphorus. You have different things that can outcompete pathogens in soil. So when it comes to looking at controlled indoor environments, what I'm looking at is different types of microbial consortiums that do certain work that is going to either elicit some type of nutrient response that's replicable on data, or that's going to do something where it's going to have a net beneficial response, whether it's a phytohormone production or antibiotics that's going to kill off pathogens in soil. So there's the things that we're kind of looking for in these controlled environments.
You are steering biologically, which is what I found extremely fascinating. In the world of crop steering for hydroponics, you're generating stress, right? Vegetative and generative cues. So as you're going through that process, it's pretty amazing. I would love to talk to, where's Josh? Josh Darvis. Let's hear your take on this, man. Let me get your mind through.
It all sounds amazing, and there's 100 ways to do it. And you got to find the person, you got to find the environment, and you can look for the expressions, and it can be cocoa, peat, or whatever. We choose to identify with just full, natural, in the ground, roots on the earth, frequency coming up through the earth, and treating the plant like a sentient being, like the magical herbalist 420,000-year-old creature that evolved alongside of humanity. We want to tap into the DNA and microbiome and the whole entire system of pulsing, energy back and forth into the plant. So we want to see genetics coming out of the earth, breathing in air, and we want to make the most raw, dynamic, diverse soil that we can possibly do from our surroundings. And then when that tree and that plant grows and the roots start wrapping around rocks and crystals and sticks and leaves, it knows what to do. We don't have to come out with a bunch of products and say, yo, check it out, I'm steering this. What we're doing is we're sitting back, we're setting an environment, and we're saying, we love you, we appreciate you, and we're in awe of the magic that you bring. I can't wait to see what comes out of this. Of course, we're going to look for varietals. Of course, we're going to do our math, check our, all of our systems, make sure everything's dialed. We're making teas, we're fermenting. We're doing natural. We know that the seed is the ultimate potential, and all of the microbiology comes and gets stored in the seed. We make products. Our products are nothing compared to nature. So I'm gonna look towards Mother Nature to create this type of magic that we're looking for in breeding. And when that seed grows, whoa, it's powerful. It's a bigger stock. It's starting to get psychedelic in here.
Nice. Yeah, and the biggest thing with phenohunting that I can impart is that you need to know how to grow well enough to make the plant express. It doesn't matter whether it's cocoa or soil or hydroponic. You have to grow the plant well enough for it to express to be able to make good selections.
That's true. Look, if you can't grow good weed, how are you going to be able to select something for its best potential, right? That's one of the big things. Like, look at a lot of people who have offerings and then see if they know how to grow weed.
And even if you do, you know, 100 privatize something or categorize it and kind of monopolize, or you know, on a certain strain, like certain varietal, it's going to act and it's going to express different in different environments. So it's almost like, what are you copywriting? You're copywriting an environment, a substrate, and a team, and that will make a different product afterwards, you know?
Yeah, and I want to endorse what you do, because there's, you know, I think there's a big difference between synthetic cultivation indoors and doing regenerative agriculture outdoors. And I know this because I do both. I have terrible soil, and most of the soil that you see globally has less than 2% organic matter. It also is deficient in nutrients, and so you have to bioremediate, and you have to do all of the things that you guys do, whether it's crop covers, composting, hugelkultur beds, because those are all the types of things that I do on my soils outdoor. For the modified growing mixes, which operate more like hydroponic media, regardless of whether you're building a complex soil food web in your system or whether or not you're doing bare minimum like I do. You know, I do microbial inoculants and I mainly balance mineral nutrition. You have to understand too that there's different approaches for what you're doing. And so my approach for agronomic outdoor soils is like what you guys do. You know, it's, you know, hugelkultur beds, and, you know,
There's something out there for everyone, and one may not even be better than the other. There's certain ways to do it. We have our angle, and I appreciate and respect everyone else's angle. And it's super, really interesting to listen to everything.
Yeah, and it's mind blowing because it's so subjective. It's interpretation. What is good? What's good for you? What is good? I mean, I think there's kind of a standard. There's a bar for that. But also, do you like chocolate, or do you like bananas, or do you like gas, or do you like candy? You know, it's all open to interpretation. It's all beautiful, and you know, I think there's a lot of good breeding going on, and there's a lot of bad breeding going on. So it's a combination of these things, and it's the yin and yang of the cannabis world.
When you're an annual outdoor breeder, you're breeding one time a year. The whole entire process and the whole thought process is totally different. Like when you're indoor, you have a chance to do it 4 or 5 times in 1 year. You could even grow it in different substrates all 5 times to see which one's the best and say, oh, this one works best for cocoa. This one's best for peat. Outdoors, it's just a different situation. That's
right.
all.
Yeah, I mean, we have a research and development facility, so we're constantly A/B testing everything. I want to know what light works the best. Under canopy, does it really benefit? And I'm a huge fan of under canopy, by the way.
If I wasn't growing indoor, I wouldn't be able to expedite my projects that I do, and my projects still take a really long time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if it was seasonal and I could only do what I was doing outdoor, it would take so much longer of a time period.
Yeah, I have a seed production room that's 18 lights. That's a small seed production room, but then I have 10 tents that are single lights to where we can do projects really fast if we're looking for stuff, if we're doing breeding for specific goals, if we want to test stuff in a controlled environment, it's one light. If we're breeding autoflowers and doing some interesting stuff.
Let me ask you, what's the number one trait that you look for in a male plant? Because I get this question all the time.
The number one, I would say, for me, is I want something that looks similar to my female plant. It looks like a male version of the female plant that I'm breeding towards. But the thing is, with selecting males, the best way to select the male is to put the pollen on something, grow that out, and see what it contributes. The more you work with the plant, the more you understand the lines. So, like,
it takes a long time.
It takes a long time to understand, and the things, it's really goal dependent. What are your goals? Do you want something that's vigorous, or do you look for terps? You know, you can do the stem rub. A lot of people say stem rub, and I find that there's interesting things with stem rubs, but it's not the end all be all. And it really depends on what your goals are.
That's the point. So when I'm making selections, I'm growing for 2 different purposes. Is it going full term where I want a more vegetative expression with the same term, or is it more generative, right? Do I want that tight leaf to calyx ratio that carries the same terps?
Yeah, and I do a lot of feminized breeding. So, when we're talking about feminized and reversals, it's like, and a lot of times things on paper, you're looking at recessive traits versus dominant traits. And, you basically take sour and you self-sour and you don't necessarily get what you're looking for. But you take something like Blue Dream, for example, you self that, you get about 4 different expressions across the board. It's super stable. So you get 4 different versions of Blue Dream, and that's it. Gelato 33, you get 3,000 different versions of that genetic.
Yep, I've seen it. For me, what I'm mainly looking at is structure, the frame of those things, and whether or not they have a early onset of flowering. I like to stress things really hard and make sure that they don't pre-flower, because usually that'll indicate that I won't have any hermaphroditic tendencies in the line. It's not always a guarantee, but the best thing to do, in my opinion, is when you take something and you cross it a bunch of a wide variance of varietals, and then you grow out the progeny for those, and then you can kind of see how the male expresses itself.
Right.
But it takes so freaking long, you know, and it's like, it can take like
years. It can take years, and there's not a lot of guys doing the work, like really doing the work. And the ones that are doing it aren't talking about it. You know, I mean, let
me talk about this for a second. So I love to hunt with the same irrigation strategy. Does it fit within my system? Is it a 9-week finishing cultivar? Does she fit with my other plants in that system, right? There's a standard generative and vegetative cube system. Now, if I'm growing with a small bud trait candy, I'm gonna start to bulk that at like day 15, 16, 17. Because I know I need a little bit more weight on that, but still be productive, focus on quality. So if I'm gonna let it go the full term, it's gonna be driven to whatever it is. So making selections in that same irrigation, that standard practice, you cannot manage without measurement, which is why Arroyo sensors are part of our system. We use Arroyo crops here. We have to manage that process, making individualized selections for those traits. How do you go back and replicate it? That's the point. We want to be able to measure this so we can manage it.
Data is super important. Super important. Data is everything. When it comes down to it, for real breeding. And another thing, like if I'm working with an F1, I may not select one male. I may select several males and see what that gives me. It just depends, especially if it's something I've never worked with before. It's like, how do you really identify what the right male is?
Exactly.
The only way to do it is really grow it out.
I don't use the males that flower right away. That's one big thing. The first one that shows the male sex is not the one I use if I'm breeding.
Although to pick your brain on this one, talk to us about selections. Mike, talk to us about the selection process for a little bit.
My selection process? I'll tell you some things about my selection process that I may have never told anybody before. One of the things that I like to do is I like to study nature, and I like to mimic it. Term biomimicry comes to mind. The idea is, how does nature produce perfection, and how do we seek to attain that? I'm not talking about times when things mess up in nature. I'm talking about when everything is in harmony and in symbiosis. I imagine how plants live in the wild, the traits that's required to create the most immune, the strongest immunity, the strongest vigor, the most expressive in all aspects. Like, I'm looking for a male that is good at everything it does. I'm looking for a male that's creative as well as intellectual. I'm looking for a male that can do math and art, that can grow big and outrun the kids at school. I'm studying every aspect of the plant from beginning to end. I'm studying the plant in its seedling life cycle, then I'm studying the plant in its clone life cycle. And I never pick a male that I haven't cloned at least 2 or 3 generations. Unlike other breeders, I was just having a conversation with Ben, who was talking about how he only does selections from the seed, which is appropriate for a true full season outdoor selection process. For me specifically, we're really looking for males that can succeed both indoors and outdoors. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, but some plants cannot do either. I'm looking for the ones that can. The ones that can succeed in the corporate office, but they can also succeed if they had to run a farm on their own. When I choose a male, I don't just put one seed per container. I put at least 10 seeds in a container, and only one of those seeds makes it out. It's very Spartan of an approach, but I'm not looking for weaklings. I'm looking for legends, and I'm looking for males that will be remembered for 2,000 years. So every part of my selection process is made to produce that thing. And it's no joke. I take it very seriously, and I do everything I can to guarantee that we're only working with the 1 out of a million. And that's the only way you can create seeds that are going to compete in the world of the most incredible geniuses, all looking to, give back to Mary Jane and the beauty that she provides us. So my selection process is essentially a spiritual process in which I'm essentially looking for the male that I align with most physically, mentally, and spiritually, and creatively. And I can tell from the way the plant grows, the way it adapts, the way it is, how it resists environmental stresses. And that's the male I want. So it takes several generations, and like one of the things I talked about, which I think is useful maybe for some people out there, is to pop more seeds and have multiple seeds together and only picking the ones that win. Life is a competition. And if you're putting a male in a little, what do they call them, little baby chambers that grow babies? Incubators. Yeah, that's not all right. That's not what you want. You want the one that beat all the others to make it to the top. Imagine a hemp field. Imagine one bud with 50 seeds dropping in situ in the soil. What is it going to be doing but producing 50 seedlings? How many plants can grow in this area? And that tells you how competitive nature is, right? And out of those, how many of those can survive in an indoor environment, stay safe, stable as a clone, and be effective in its life cycle? So that's what I do. And that's just a little bit of it, but yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that, Mike. That's beautiful. Round of applause for Michael Fang real quick, guys. That was beautiful, bro. It's really intriguing because my curiosity comes is, what is that trait? How do we molecularly find that trait so we can be able to help, not necessarily speed up and take a shortcut, but identify that strong Spartan that much faster, right? Can molecular breeding help us get there? AI assisted using bioinformatics. I'd love to get you guys' thoughts on that because that was a perfect segue into this topic.
I mean, data-driven breeding is, so as far as using data-driven breeding to identify, using steps to identify specific traits and specific things you're looking for, yeah, that's possible. But the process that Michael is talking about, I feel like it's going to be hard to quantify, with data like that. I mean, maybe it's possible. What's your thoughts?
The thing is, can you measure intuition?
Can you measure intuition?
Can you quantify something that's ethereal with a plant?
Yeah.
Can you I don't need it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I mean, we all have a connection, right? We have a connection to the plant. And if we find something that's special, oftentimes it helps us grow it while we're growing it. It's that type of synergism that we have that can't be quantified by like data, right? It can't be it's quantified by like John would say, it's intuition. It's intuitive gardening. It's being able to understand.
I taught John about intention and intuition and he took it and made it his whole branding, which I think is very tacky, but whatever. In my opinion, genetics, we're just only beginning to tap into the true understanding of it. It's scalar, it's fractal, it's frequency, and I don't think we truly understand it yet. I think what we're seeing is a printout of a time, a place and a time in history of that plant's epigenetic life cycle. Can that plant deteriorate? True, and it's yes. And is that plant deteriorating, or is it epigenetically improving? And what does that mean? And how do you measure that? I don't know, but I don't care. What I really care about is just having the one that when those measurements are made and when we have those tools, that it will be the number one. Just like when we had Grape Stomper, and in 2012, it was the only plant I ever knew that tested over 30%. And
You know, if we're talking about powdery mildew resistance, yeah, that's very easy, but not very easy to identify. But that's something very specific that can be identified. You know, you look at these specific.
So much of it can be.
Yeah, it's if we're talking about something that's so complex, and there are a lot of things we can identify. Right?
Agronomy, like we can measure most things. We can measure. Here's a good example.
Yeah.
You can take things like standard soil test, saturated paste test, leaf tissue analysis, and sap analysis. People can develop whole nutritional regimens for specific cultivars based off of data now. Yeah. It's not just one of the benefits that I've had based off of data is being able to take the intuitive nature and the experience that I've had with the plant. Because I could say, hey, I'm experiencing a magnesium deficiency, or I'm experiencing iron deficiency, or something like that. But being able to see that on data allows you to understand how to approach nutrients at different specific times. And that's going to have an overall effect, right? Because when it comes, for me, everything, I take a holistic approach, but nutrition is like the foundation of everything that I do, right? Because if you don't have healthy nutrition, there's nothing to build on. And for me, there's different approaches that I take for nutrition, but I don't know. Anyway.
How about getting Justin? Get Justin over here.
Mr. Gibbons.
We'll talk about Mr. Justin from Apical Biotek. So we're back on live, and we want to talk to Justin Gibbons from Apical Biotek. Whole genome sequencing. He does tissue culture, but he knows a lot about a lot of things.
And we're back. Brandon, come back, dude. Thank you for blessing us.
So let's talk about sequencing, whole genome. I wish Chris was here. Unfortunately, Chris, big shout out to Chris.
Big shout out to Chris.
Chris Levitz.
He didn't make it, unfortunately.
No. Left us high and dry. Well, high. So whole genome sequencing. Let's talk about it. About traits you can identify.
Yeah, there's a couple of companies out there spent some money doing a lot of full genome sequencing, trait identification, bioinformatics with AI-driven algorithms that look at the genetics for specific outcomes or predictable outcomes. And now it's applying that to breeding, right? So looking at specific traits. And then that kind of tails into patenting and looking at enforceable licensing deals for the future, right? Because you can't do that right now. It's not really enforceable. But proving that you bred something, the parents, the work you did, and the traits that you pushed through are the future. And it's all traditional ag stuff, right?
Yeah, and we're talking about bringing in stability into the plant, but like companies like Phenome Networks out of Israel, they have we're using a product called Phenome One, which is their software program, and you can basically use it to do all kinds of stuff. You can inventory your genetics, but then when it comes to breeding and identifying traits, They're working with AI now and predictive modeling. So the future is looking really amazing with genetics. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, James. And there really hasn't been much technology or tools that have been catered around pheno hunting, tissue culture, lines, right, full mirrors, stem lines, and all that stuff. So being able to actually go back, track, and measure that information is crucial, especially if we want to progress into taking this particular cultivar that's banging in this terroir and taking it into another market.
Well, and variety testing is so huge. Being able to test your genetics, the thing is like if you can take and you can try your genetics that you've crossed and try those out in 7 different locations, 7 different regions with different environments, you're going to get 7 different results. And then you can start optimizing the plant for those specific environments. So it's a beautiful thing.
It is. Yeah. Managing measurements. What else? I would like to ask the audience if where do you think we're heading?
We need Danny Danko up here.
We need Danny Danko.
No,
bring the pizza. Man.
Danny from High Times.
Come get comfortable, brother. Danny Danko, thank you for coming through, my man.
How's it going?
Welcome to the panel.
Oh, I'm enjoying it up.
Danny is also an author. He wrote a really amazing book.
Yeah, I got a copy on me.
I've known Danny a long time. High Times magazine, a lot of cups back in the day, a lot of smoking.
He's got the books.
Dude, this is his book. It's a badass book.
Yeah, that's my book. I think I might have handed you one of your first cannabis cups at some point.
You did.
On
Yeah,
stage. I have a memory of it, but my memory is pretty foggy.
Yeah, we were high. Yeah, for sure.
That was Loud Scout, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
2012.
So my memory's not so bad.
Not so bad.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. 12 years ago.
And I entered several times and did not win.
Yeah.
Winning.
There you go.
Fall down 7, stand up 8.
I'm very excited about your book, Breeding, because I think so important in such great information and so much amateur breeding is going on, and polyhybridization for better and worse, obviously. So, to me, what's interesting, I haven't done a ton of breeding in my life. I've maybe made a couple crosses here and there, just fooling around. But I study it. I learn about it. I created the Seed Bank Hall of Fame at High Times, and I used to choose all the top 10 strains of the year and all that, and judged it probably more High Times cups than anybody. But it's the breeding that creates the variety. And you guys were talking earlier about how everything is subjective. We're humans, and just like any other mammal, it's like you take a gummy. The same gummy is going to affect a 100-pound person differently than a 180-pound person. And whether you ate that morning or didn't eat, you took it on an empty stomach, all of that. It's all so subjective. And even breeding, I think, a combination of the science and the intuition is what's necessary, kind of,
Do you like blondes or do you like brunettes?
Exactly. It's a personal preference. And each person's affected differently, even by the same strain, I believe, like the same cultivar, we should say. But to me, what's the most interesting thing is desirable traits is ever shifting. What's desirable?
And undesirable.
The traits, And there's recessive traits, and that's an interesting part of genetics. And the other interesting thing for me also is that the only new things come when 2 things that are very different are crossed together. You know what I mean? And to me, that's nature teaching us that diversity is important. And this siloization of genetics pretty much usually leads to nothing new. You know what I mean? And even, some recessive kind of impact.
Well, inbreeding goes on.
That's what I mean.
Inbreeding depression goes on, and it's unfortunate.
Right. But as a breeder, you're the god. You choose what lives and dies. I mean, if it's survival of the fittest, like Michael was saying, he chooses, if it's survival of the fittest, ultimately you're choosing which live and which die, and you're the nature, your evolution when it comes to a plant that we're manipulating, as but what's desirable, like what was desirable in the 90s when I got started growing it, you wanted chunky buds that, finished in 45 to less than 45 days if possible, but 45 days and bag appeal and wait, and slowly shifted towards, fruits and gas and, in every direction. And, I think that to me is exciting. I like the diversity, you know what I mean? Like I like lots of different flavors. I like, there's some that aren't my cup of tea also, but that's the great thing. And the fact that, strains have been lost to, eternity or whatever, it's a shame. If they were great and they were lost just because of prohibition, and like hoarding. So yeah, I'm just, and then, okay, desirable traits now, now it's like, does it wash? Can I?
Yeah.
So, and there's desirable traits for the consumer, right? Like, or the hash maker, but there's desirable traits for the breeder. Can it resist pests and mold? Can it, so what's desirable?
Well, that's not really for the breeder. We're just stewards.
Well, for the grower,
for the cultivator, right? Yeah.
Right. For the cultivator, ultimately, he wants something that's going to, or he or she wants something that's going to survive.
Yeah, it's got vigor,
in their climate. They could be, in a harsh climate and need something that finishes sooner.
Too many breeders think they're gods, but we're just stewards of the plant at the end of the day. And I think, manipulating the plant, it can make the world a better place.
Yeah, and like I said, I think the diversity, like crossing two things that are different, very different and far apart. Not indica sativa, okay, because we all know that that's an oversimplification of a much more. Yeah, it's oversimplified. People say it's inaccurate. You can say that, but it's not bullshit. You know what I mean? Like some plants have thinner leaves and flower for a longer period of time.
It's a very simple way of.
It's this oversimplification, right? And that happens a lot. Like, that's what I do. I try to get entry-level people. This is a book for beginners, so grandma can grow 6 plants in her closet, because I truly believe in home grow as the alternative to corporate cannabis. And people ask me, how do I get into the cannabis industry? I'm trying to get you out of the cannabis industry. I want you self-sufficient. So you know what you're growing. You know how it's fed, because most cannabis obviously is overfed. Overwatered. So you and now you have control over what it is, how it's treated, how it's processed, and and at the end of the day, it's like cheaper and it's fun. It's so that's why I do it. And for the love of the plant, because it's a healing flower.
You've always been super passionate about weed.
Yeah. Aside from family and friends, it's like number 3 in my life as far as commitment to and pushing for the end of a stigma. You know what I mean? Like, and here we are, like still worried about getting raided. Still, friends of ours still locked up back home. There's still a death penalty in some places for possession of cannabis. So we've come a long way, but we got a long way to go. I get a little on my soapbox here, but
it's good though. Yeah. Well, and the plant gives back. So what you put in, you get out of it. There's a direct correlation to quality and these other things. By what you put into it, you get back out of it. The plant will give you back what you put into it. And it's not like that with everything in life.
Right. And the true believers and the lifers are the ones that get it, I'm not, this isn't about me. This is about the plant. I'm shining a light on this wonderful, amazing, misunderstood medicine / miracle, right? That thousands of people I've met that tell me that they wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for cannabis. They overcame addictions. They overcame traumatic stress. They used it for trauma, for cancer, for AIDS, wasting syndrome. Just multitude of different pain management, post-traumatic stress. So the list goes on and on and on. It's a healing flower. It's a medicine, and it's here to help us. Just like it's like I watched the documentary. They were killing the dolphins, and the dolphins are here to help us. You know what I mean? And teach us things. They're smarter than we are. And cannabis is the same way. It's here to help us. It's looking at us like a dolphin. Like, why are you demonizing me? I want to help you. We have receptors specific to this. We have receptors specific to this plant in our bodies. Like the people who don't consume cannabis are actually deficient in cannabis. You have a cannabis deficiency. That's the way I see it, you know.
But the good thing is awareness is improving.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, my parents were very against cannabis growing up, or at least that's what they told me. And I heard some interesting stories about how cannabis was bad when I was a kid. But, you know, and I had an elder figure that I looked up to that was very pro-cannabis. And there wasn't a lot of awareness back then, but my parents saw 60 Minutes, I don't know, almost 10 years ago with Sanjay Gupta talking about the benefits of CBD. And that opened the door for a lot of people in the United States, a lot of Republicans, a lot of people that didn't believe that marijuana was a good thing. But it's like, how can you take that away from somebody if it makes their life better and it doesn't hurt anybody else?
Yeah, absolutely.
It won't kill you.
And it won't kill you. And if you look at kids,
believe me, I've tried.
Yeah, for sure.
We we have these competitions where we blow through 30 or 40 strains in 5 or 6 days, and it's. People are like, oh, you just get high for a living. Yeah, sure, but it's work. Like you got to keep notes and it's data.
It's really fun though.
And some people will say, how can you tell the difference? People ask me, how can you tell the difference? I can tell the difference. Believe me. Like there's a lot of factors at play. And then they're like, doesn't it get boring smoking weed all day? I'm like, I'll let you know when it gets boring. You know what I mean? Like I enjoy it still. 40 something years later.
It's so funny though how the way flower looks is such a qualifier as far as like for me it's effect, it's flavor. I love flavor and effect. Those are the two most important things. So like pheno hunting, I give everybody joints now. They don't get to see the flower. I just want to know how does it make you feel? How did it taste? What do you think of it from that perspective?
Good 2 gram joints too.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about getting those bigger joints, and you see all the flaws when you smoke joints too. For sure.
Some of my favorite strains for just effect are not good looking. They're like wispy. Like a Nigerian silk. It takes 15 weeks and just grows these like little dreadlocks of like nuggets, but the effect is incredible.
I learned.
It's uplifting. It's like cerebral, uplifting, almost psychedelic.
I learned early on. Mike's dead. Yeah, I smoked cat piss early on. I was fortunate enough to be in the Bay Area when we had the real cat piss, or my interpretation of the real cat piss. And that was the ugliest stuff on the planet. We got these little bracts in a bag for $60 an age. You would get little bracts, and it wasn't. If you looked at the trichomes or you looked at the stuff, it was amazing, but it wasn't bud like today. It wasn't these nested bracts. And the dog shit too. Yeah, it's like same thing. It was ugly weed, and ugly weed is still good. It has its place. Because really, at the end of the day, we're all about the taste and the effect. Yeah, well, cat piss is long gone. I'm doing a documentary on cat piss. So yeah, the one. Yeah.
What's something that you learned writing this book about breeding? Not about writing books, but about breeding. Like, what's something that was an epiphany? Did you have any kind of like epiphany of like, oh wow, like a realization of any kind?
Well, the first realization was that I couldn't write very well. To be 100% honest, I wrote this book and we did 5 different versions. And there's 100,000 words in this book. There was 22 contributors. I learned a lot on tissue culture. Justin, Apical Biotek, my good friend, has enlightened me about tissue culture and meristem, tissue culture versus nodal propagation. There's a big confusion with a lot of that stuff in the industry. And there's so many things I learned along the way, and there's so many people that contributed. I mean, writing stuff out, like if you want to understand how autoflowers work, if you cross an autoflower with a photoperiod, that first generation is not autoflower. So a lot of people think it is. They read it like, I made autoflower with biscotti. It doesn't work like that. You have to have the second generation, basically, from the first generation, you're going to get something that's a fast flowering plant, and that trait is recessive. You need 2 of those recessive traits together to make the plant express autoflower. And, breeding autoflower is a lot of fun. And there's a lot of work involved with it to create something that's a good product. And I got to give it up for Mephisto Genetics because I looked at autoflower in 2012 and I thought it was garbage, and I said I'd never work with it. But I've said that about feminized seeds back in the early 2000s. I said that with LED lights when they were the purple lights. I said I'd never use those. The blurples, it was terrible. Yeah, and so many people tried to sell me on that. And autoflowers, until Mephisto really came out with good autoflower, I didn't believe in autoflower.
It's come a long way.
It's come a long way.
Yeah.
It's come a long way. And there's autoflower that you would not be able to tell that it was autoflower.
Yeah.
It's gone there, and it works as far as a row crop. You know, we're talking about planting thousands of acres. Autoflower is the best way to do that.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing early season, because what happens if you're going out there early season, you're doing a bunch of autos.
Yeah.
You can go get a whole harvest in for your extracts.
Oh, you can do 3 rooms a year.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
for
but in the right
extracts,
place.
for edibles.
Yeah.
If you're a commercial facility and you're not considering doing autoflowers, in
Yeah.
my opinion, you're fucking up on your business model.
Well, you can even use it as a bumper crop, right? So you get it planted before, and then right as you're about to harvest, you have your photo period. I mean, there's so many different ways you can approach it, and they're very easy to grow in a lot of ways. They grow like a row crop. You grow like a tomato, and get great success.
And it's also, I think it's really contingent on where you're at, but I like where I'm at in Oklahoma. Well, what I like to do is early season autos, and then I put all the photos out in July.
Yeah.
Late season July, you don't have huge plants, but you do row crop where you kind of do it like vineyards do. Sure. You can have manageable plants. You can get all of what you need off there to your extracts, your edibles, and that is like the best way to approach it. At least from what I've seen. Autoflowers have a great place, and they've come a fucking long way from what I've seen. Because I remember back in the lowrider days, you know, you'd see that shit.
Early girl and lowrider, yeah.
You know, in the fucking magazines, dude. It was like, you know.
Yeah, now they have fast flower, like fast ones too.
Yeah, that's a half auto, half photo.
Yeah, right. Well, I heard a rumor that this book comes with a pack of seeds. Is that correct?
We are. It's funny because we are doing packs of seeds with the book at the show. If you want a book at the show, it's €100. You get a pack, you get a book. We have deals with 4 packs and T-shirts and hats and all that good stuff. But yeah, and we sold through I brought the last of the first 420 books that I printed, and we weren't sure how it was going to sell. When you write a book, you don't know if it's going to sell, if it's going to do well, if it's not going to. I mean, this is my first book. There's been a lot of trials and tribulations and a lot of interesting things. I self-published this book too, so we didn't use a publishing company. It was all the handful of people that I worked with.
Let me ask you a question there.
Yes, sir.
In business, right? Yes. Cultivation side, all set aside. As a business, what was the hardest thing for you to develop to get to what you're doing? How were you able to integrate all of your experience into a cohesive business model that made sense?
Oh, so the biggest thing is working with people that are the best at what they do, and I feel like working with you can't do everything in business. Once you go from home grow to a warehouse with 50 lights, it requires more people, right? And as you scale from 50 to 100, it requires to go more people. Then you start getting into breeding and genetics and all these other things. You need to be a specialist at what you're good at and let stuff go. Back in the day, I used to do extract. I used to do construction. I used to do a little bit of electrical, not very good at it, but you did everything. Now, the beauty of evolving into a commercial environment is being the best at that, whatever it is. If you're the breeder, like I do the breeding, I do a lot of stuff. I printed hats the other day, but as a business owner. But being able to work with people like Ryan over there who does our podcast.
Shout out to Ryan again, podcast winner.
I could never do what he does, and I wouldn't want to because it would take away focus from what I do. And so working with a fine-tuned machine, that's the best thing in the world.
Finding the right people around you that can do the tasks that you're not necessarily proficient at.
But even so, maybe you could do it. Maybe you could even do it better. But they can be a version of you that's acceptable. You know, like, because really when you're building a business, you're trying to build 50 people that would do the best in whatever that is, whether it's graphic design or whether it's videography or whether it's cultivation or whether even trimmers. You know, it's like you want people, if you have trimmers, when they're trimming your plants, you want them to take pride in what they do. You would want them to do it how you would do it if you were doing it.
You got to set proper expectations, right? This is where professional maturity comes in.
Yeah.
How many? Okay, so this is a big stickler for me. How do you professionally mature through an industry where you struggle to manage people because everything was so internal?
Yeah.
You've been insular. You may be an introvert in nature, right? So how do you get to that level from transitioning to being great at what you do by yourself and scaling into a commercialized team? Because now that you're scaling into other markets, that's what are we doing here? Are we going in the future?
I know the secret. I absolutely know the secret.
One of the biggest problems that I actually had integrating myself into conventional legal market was trying to find people that I could vet for certain positions that I've never personally have had to fulfill. Marketing teams, sales teams, all the different things that come with the business side of things. Because I was always just growing weed, and if I was selling weed, I was dealing with my homeboys. I was, you know what I mean? And then when you get into these legal spaces, it's all completely different. So you're relying on resources.
There's a lot of trial and error too. So learning how to do marketing, it's like you want to hire somebody that does good marketing if you're going to do it. I mean, and same thing with graphic design. It's like, why would you waste your time doing it when you can find someone that'll do it better? For me, at least. But I think one of the biggest things with building a company is failing a lot and then getting back up, getting kicked in the nuts every day, waking up and smiling.
Yeah,
it's just
got to be resilient.
Oh yeah, but SOPs are huge. And what we do, this is the magic that we've learned recently with SOPs, is we're writing SOPs and I give them to my partner and he goes through and actually tries to execute the SOP from what we've written down. And then he basically gives us notes on it and we improve it.
That's called kind candor. I'm going to tell you that you messed up, but I'm going to do it because I'm coming from a place of care. So that's that professional maturity that you're leveling up to build the company. You've been doing this for a really long time, James. You're building a company now, which requires a lot of communication, strong communication, being able to give feedback in a constructive way to where somebody's not going to shut down. That's a key sign of a leader. It's great.
It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun.
It's a lot of work.
That's why we're here, right?
Fun,
this plan brings us together. So it's pretty incredible to see where we're at today. But as we continue to grow, we're here in Spain. This is my first year out to Spain for Spannabis, so I'm grateful for this time and opportunity that we've been to spend this time together. And guys, I know this is our first Connect together here. This is an engaging thing. We want you guys to ask questions. If you have questions, please interrupt. We're here. This is not just us up here talking heads. We want to hear from you if you have any curiosities. Is there any questions at this point? Yes. Name and where you're from, please.
My name's Selena Sativa. I'm from Kelowna, British Columbia. Oh, thank you. I'm curious, just in going back to the discussion when we're talking about testing and data, how can we measure that sacred relationship that we have with the plant? You had spoken to us being stewards of the medicine, and how there is this connection that brings us all together, but it's rooted in the plant. So I'm curious, just on the level of trying to find the best genetics, but also to your point, you're talking about what are you actually measuring? So I'm curious, how would you measure intuition, that sacred connection, and really uplift cannabis in a way where she gets to be shared with everybody, not just for terp profiles, but for so much more? And and also to your point, and how can you bring it back to your community? And how can you do it on the smallest scale for yourself, your family, and for those around you, and really make a big impact in your local community?
I think it starts with data points. Even though we're talking about some of the spiritual side and some of the other things that you can't totally quantify, I think it starts with data points. We collect 53 data points for each cultivar that we're pheno-hunting, right? So when we go through the variety testing and the pheno-hunting, we're collecting 53 points of data. We're measuring weight and other things, but also effect and how does it smoke and how does it make, especially how does it make you feel? At the end of the day, does it make you feel good? but it's so subjective to the individual. It can make 10 people feel 10 different ways. But
well, this is a great point, right? You want to track your measurement because your experience is going to be different than your experience. So I want you to fill out a form, a very simple form of explaining what your experience was so you can validate against what your intuition is. It's a connection. Please. Name where you're from.
I'm Kelly from Dragonfly Earth Medicine, and I've been breeding for 30 years. And I just think it's really interesting when we're talking about breeding, and when there's a lot of men just talking about breeding. Breeding involves women and men. It involves female and male. And I think that we can have a really well-rounded discussion when we're able to bring more women who have been breeding, who are not upfront. A lot of some of the greatest varietals or strains or clones that are out there are really the women, you know, and in also purchasing and supporting farms for so long. I would go up in the hills of Northern Cali, and it was the women that knew exactly the strains and what's in the bag. And the guys were always like, hey, I don't know what this is. Woman would put her face in the bag, and she would know exactly what that was. Blue Dream, beautiful time period. But I think that if we're going to be talking about intuition, it's really important that we're not just throwing that word around, because intuition comes from a sense of Mother Earth. We all talk about what is the best way to grow, and it's all equal, but nobody asks the plant that. Nobody is asking the plant what her best way to grow is. And I'm, you know, not trying to down anybody's party, but for sure she wouldn't say hydroponic inside of a huge, massive warehouse. Yeah, breed me that way. That's the way that I want to be bred. And I really feel like we could step back and we can have a conversation about what the plant truly wants. And if we're going to be talking about intuition, intuition comes from our gut. We use that term, intuition coming from our gut. That means that intuition actually comes from the trillions of microbiology that are inside of your own body. That's where our intuition comes from. And people's intuition are all different because what are we feeding? What kind of fodder are we giving the microbiology inside of your body? Is it a bunch of yeast that really doesn't have high intelligence? Or is this beautiful prolific fungi and protozoa that has high super intelligence? So when we're talking about the best breeding, we now have access to the human biome to understand that a lot of different maladies come from what's actually measured within the microbiome. And we can also do that with plants. This is the next part. This is the future. For us to be able to actually go to the plant and realize what are the endophytic system within the plant, which is the plant's microbiome. We can study that. We can look at the different species of microbiology in there. We can count it and we can realize that that microbiology is what is creating the secondary metabolites. In the same way as when the yew tree, we found Taxol. And it became this huge, massive thing. And they went into the woods and they took out a bunch of yew trees and, oh, Taxol, Taxol. But what they realized was the cambium layer inside of the tree was being sparked with Taxol because of the endophytic system. It was only the fungi within the plant that was creating the Taxol. We know that that's the same exact way as what is creating THC, THCV, THCA. And once we start understanding, oh yeah, well you have this certain microbiology mixed with this certain microbiology, then that is what creates this beautiful terpene profile. I believe that's what's going to bring us back to understanding the plant as her full natural being, connected to nature and connected to microbiology. When we're direct feeding these plants in a hydroponic situation, it's absolutely no different than feeding you through your arm. We have bypassed the entire microbiology of that plant. Do I believe that that's the best for breeding and for longevity? No, I don't. And I think that that is a really important topic. It's not about how you feel it's best to breed and what works for you or what works for you or even what works for me. But the question is, what works for the plant? And if we're going to talk about bringing this plant into the future and we're actually going to hold this being, and we're really, I mean, we can't say that it's not medicinal. Of course it's medicinal. We're all gaining this huge, massive access of ascension through smoking this plant. It's bringing us to a higher level. We all know that because we get together with people in the cannabis and the plant medicine industry. We're having amazing conversations. We're rising the vibe for the rest of the collective consciousness. And it's something to hold. We are the medicine makers. You are the medicine maker. You are the medicine educator. And I think that, you as all of us and all of us connected. And I just think it's a really important conversation. And thank you so much for your time.
Mycorrhizal relationship.
It's an earth relationship. Yeah. It's a relationship to earth. It's the umbilicus that connects us to what is truly important. And this is a plant. Thanks.
I want to try your flower. So
yeah.
Come to the podcast.
I have some beautiful stuff right here. I have some hash that is really amazing.
Terpene values are based on just specific numbers. Do you ever think we'll get to a place where terpenes are measured for the sensation that it gives us? Meaning that lemon terps at a smaller amount will taste different than to us than like an earthy one at like 4% or something.
Got it. So how do you measure effect from a certain terpene? Anthony, please correct me if I'm wrong. You want to go a little bit deeper than that basic nature of it, right? Or how do you measure the effect rather than just being subjective? And I'll start with, I'm just going to give my perspective because for me, my body, if I smell it and it's citrusy or fruity, that's going to give me a more high effect. If it's gassy, earthy, piney, that's going to get me stoned. I'm going to get locked. So how do you measure that subjective nature around what my endocannabinoid system is telling me?
Justin.
Mr. Gibbons? No?
Mr. Gibbons.
Anybody? Any thoughts on that? Because I would love to know. I'm curious.
Well, I think so. Abstract Tech has written some white papers recently, and they're diving into flavorants. Flavorants, which, we talk terpenes all the time, right? And flavorants are actually thiols and alcohol esters and other things like that. And so we're still scratching the surface of all this, but we're really starting to figure it out. Is it narcotic? Does it give you a narcotic effect? Does it give you an uplifting effect? There's so many different types of effects you can get from it, and all these different flavors and where are they coming from.
So flavorants is a measurable tool that they're starting to explore.
They wrote 6 white papers on flavorants. And it wrote some really interesting things. It's actually in my book.
It's in James's book. Surprise, surprise. That's it. We need to know about it.
We keep going back to the book, but
it's great.
And there is supplemental information for the book online. So the book is going to slowly become obsolete because we're just like double halfway breeding. I talk about my book as something in the future, and it's here.
I couldn't agree more, James. The book is a new realization of standardization. Yeah. Where are we at? It's a baseline. Like you put a lot of great information in this book. Yeah. So guys, if you haven't checked it out, it's what, $50, $55 or something like that online.
$5,000.
$54,000. Okay, yeah. Some shekels. But
50 euros.
50 euros. Thank you. But what's cool about that is that we have something to go off of, right? There hasn't been a breeding specific book that's been published for a really long time. Danny, you might know the specific date that last book was published.
25 years. Greg Green wrote the Cannabis Breeders Bible.
Right.
In 1980, Rob Clark wrote
Marijuana Botany.
Marijuana Botany.
Right.
In 1980, amazing book.
Yeah.
And
each
time
one
for another breeding book, right?
Yeah.
I feel like the time is now. And
definitely time. And again, for like people to understand, like there's a difference between breeding and crossing strains. You know what I mean? Like actual breeding.
Seed production is different than breeding.
Seed production,
absolutely.
right? Like anybody can take male pollen and put it on a female flower and make seeds. That doesn't make those seeds good, and it also doesn't make them, this or that of the parentage. Something new comes out, and when you can muddy the gene pool, or you can improve on it, and this is what I said earlier about diversity. A true F1 hybrid, like with hybrid vigor, requires two things that are very different to create something new. It's the only way you're going to find something new. And the plant still has so much more to provide. You know what I mean? So much has been lost. I mean, it's the same kind of as like the buffalo kind of, there was all these buffalo, and then suddenly it was down to like just this tiny little group of buffalo. And all the buffalo we have now are descendants of just this one little tiny group of them. And cannabis was the same way. I mean, when all the genetics was, basically brought to Europe, to Holland, to save it from being lost by, pioneers in the 70s and into the 80s, basically saying, if this stuff stays in a prohibition-based place, we could lose it forever. So let's bring it somewhere where they at least will have a tolerance, not legal, but just tolerant. And maybe we can exist over here. But we only brought, 6 or 7 different seeds. I mean, they had skunk number 1, Northern Lights. I mean, the basis for all of this is only just a few things. So there's more out there, much more out there, a galaxy of different profiles. I mean, just maybe 15, 20 years ago, we didn't know from terpenes. It wasn't, maybe there was a few scientists or lab people that were talking about that, but now we know there's hundreds of terpenes, and so there's so much more. And this is just in a short period of time. So, there's ways you can measure things, and there's labs that can tell you things. But just like I was talking about this earlier with like the hot peppers and the measuring of like Scoville units and capsaicin, that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about that pepper. It's just it tells you something. It gives you an idea. It's not inaccurate, but it's not the end all be all. There's way more. And some of it is science, and some of it is within us, in our gut, and those two things together, we can discover more. But you can't discover more just by like growing out feminized seeds or growing out autos. There's nothing wrong with them. Everything has its place, but the new things come from, first off, first filial crosses, grown out in large populations, selected, and then stabilized. These are the things that make breeding, right? Selection, stabilization, not just, oh, I took green crack and crossed it with, orange sunshine. Now I have green sunshine. That's not breeding.
Well,
that's just making stuff up.
So you don't really have anything till you grow it out. A lot of people, and it's like the value of seeds is in their use and not in their possession. And there's a lot of people that collect seeds, and there's nothing wrong with that. But those seeds are meant to be germinated.
Yeah, and genes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, some people just store them away until they're unusable. And if you have regular seeds, pop them. And if you, people should not be afraid to do their own breeding, but get a book and learn how to do it. Do the background. Don't just cross two plants with each other. That's just throwing caution to the wind. And the real deal is, and like Kelly said, like, listen to the plant. She will tell you what she wants, and diversity is so important. We, like I said, we bottlenecked everything, and then everything kind of sprung back out of that. But with people that being able to travel and collecting landrace genetics from all over and being able to use that as building blocks, creating something new, but not just polyhybridizing everything either, and just variety, diversity, there's way more out there to be found. And that's exciting for me. That's why a book like this is so exciting, because, long after we're all gone, someone can use that information to find something new. And the medicinal and, everything else, the possibilities are endless. So let's keep scratching the surface till we get to all the possibilities, and never, there's always more out there.
And I'd love to piggyback on that, because we talk about clean practices as well. How do you stabilize the future if you're passing around dirty material? Clean practices, guys. I got to preach this. 30 to 60 seconds, 15 to 20% bleach. Scrub your shears. Alcohol does not sterilize the RNA of a viroid. It's that simple. Mr. Tissue Culture, Justin Gibbons, Tell us a little bit more about that process and understanding how clean practices, going back to James' book, and what you guys have actually incorporated in terms of like scaling clean practices.
So talking about clean plant production, right? Starts at the very beginning, goes all the way to the end, flowering out. Problem that I had dealt with a long time ago is so medicinal use, true medicinal use. I had a person in my life that had major hip surgeries at 22, given all kinds of nasty pharmaceutical drugs. None of it even worked that well. What did work was concentrate. But the problem was finding clean concentrate, not pesticide-ridden concentrate. It was everywhere.
Remediated pesticide-ridden flower that was initiated
Yep.
for that concentrate.
Yeah, so growing and extracting became a big part of my life. And going backwards, finding different genetics that express properties that, different people, they respond differently. So I hoarded genetics and, again, couldn't find clean genetics. It was so obvious to me why everybody was having to use pesticides, because there was no clean plant network. There was no clean practices. I mean, people just did what they had to and what they could do. And so getting into tissue culture, making sure that now we have clean plants from the start, and when we talk about truly clean plants, there's a lot of folks out there, there's kits you can buy to do tissue culture, and you are practicing tissue culture, but you're not really benefiting from what you're doing by doing a nodal initiation. So something we do differently is meristematic initiation. We start with a cluster of cells, 600-800 cells, maybe the width of a human hair, under a microscope. And it takes 6 to 9 months to pull a plant back out from that. But what that process does is we're initiating non-vascular tissue. And so a lot of plants, even if they have no viroid present, there's still other things, systemic bacteria, you have Fusarium, you have Pythium, things like that. And so having clean material to start with to give to growers, that then can grow clean flower, not have to use pesticides, because you're starting clean. So that's why our motto is start clean, stay clean. So.
Which takes time. To properly clean up material takes time if you're going all the way down the meristem. But there is a practice for nodal. What might be a good a good tool for nodal initiation?
I mean, like I said, there's kits out there you can buy for nodal. And nodal is okay if you start with a clean plant from phenohunting, for example, right? If you can get it in right away, then you have a much lower chance of initiating anything that would be present or having to remediate it, right? So it's a really good backup tool. And you can buy a small flow hood online. You can buy, there's a kit out there. You can buy, and nodaling, doing it in tubes. You don't need large volume. You just need to.
That's a great point. You don't need a large volume. So I know that a lot of us like to pop beans, right? We want to find the cool stuff, and I think that's an excellent use case for nodal initiation, right? You get your at-home TC kit or your starter kit from Mr. Bill Graham, whatever it might be, but you have your selection. You want to keep it clean. You don't always have to go and pay $5,000, $10,000 for a cleaning and restoration process.
Yeah, we're a commercial lab, and we do a lot of commercial stuff now. We scale quite a bit. Originally, I was doing it for myself. But there's such a demand for folks that need like hot plate remediation, right? And so we're constantly working hard, and then working with James and all the breeding he's doing and all the library he brings to the table, and the new cultivars that he's been phenohunting. And it's a lot of work. We're very busy, so we have no problems of offering solutions to help people initiate nodally and help themselves, I should say, right? Because there's so much work to be done, and we can't do it all. So,
no, we certainly cannot do it all. That's why we're here, trying to level each other up, share some tidbits of information. Let's grow together. I mean, that's what we're really trying to accomplish here. We're doing it for the first time in Europe. We're super stoked to be here, guys. The CoNNect community, we are here. This is amazing. Thank you all so much for coming out. I want to be respectful of the time because we have Legends of Hash coming right up here next at Terps Army. So, Lorenzo, I appreciate you, big dog. Thank you so much for having us here. The hospitality has been amazing. Amir and team, couldn't have done this shit without you guys. Seriously, this was incredible. Setting up here is a dream. So, Michael, thank you guys for coming out for the Organic Hub, collaborating with us, bringing our vision, our community together. together out here, because I know you guys have been doing this for a long time. And, again, we're super grateful to be here. Thank you all for coming out to participate, and really appreciate your time. Thank you guys. Much love.